Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am Nick Chase from Mirantis, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Zero Ops Application Delivery on Kubernetes. While we take a minute to let everybody arrive, I just want to remind you that if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them into the questions pane, and we will get to questions at the end. Our presenters today are Toby Bellwood from MKE and Mike Ward from Mirantis. So let's just go ahead and turn it over to them. Mike, take it away.
Thanks for joining us today for the Zero Ops Application Delivery on Kubernetes webinar. My name is Michael Ward, and I have with me today Toby Bellwood, who's the Lagoon Lead from MKE.io. Toby, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, my name's Toby Bellwood. I'm the Lagoon Lead at MKE.io. I run the Lagoon team responsible for building, maintaining and running the Lagoon installs that we're going to hear a little bit about today. Prior to MKE.io, I worked extensively in the Australian government in the open source, open data, open spatial areas. And I think, I was saying this earlier, one of the things that really makes my journey as Lagoon special is that I was a Lagoon customer before I became a Lagoon lead. So I've experienced Lagoon from the application side and from the Kubernetes side. So we'll go a little bit into some of that today.
Great. It's certainly a great perspective to have. And again, I'm Mike Ward, and I am responsible for product marketing here at Mirantis for our cloud infrastructure offerings. And I've been involved in the building, definition, and marketing of data center products for quite some time now in a variety of companies, from the semiconductor level up through the software and on the application side as well. So appreciate you joining us here today to share insight on Lagoon, and as we talk about sort of how things will be coming together and how Mirantis is going to be able to help application developers' lives be simpler moving forward. For those who may not know, the MKE.io team recently joined the Mirantis family just a handful of weeks ago. We're excited to have them a part of the team now, and looking forward to seeing the things that we can do together to help customers in their cloud native journeys and make their lives simpler. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. First, we're going to focus on the question of why is it so hard to deploy cloud native applications? We'll kind of talk about that from the perspective of both a little bit of the infrastructure aspect, but we're going to really focus this around the perspective of the applications developer. Then we're going to talk about, as an application developer, how do you get out of the SysOps game? How do you get out of managing and running the infrastructure that you're being asked to do, and really let you focus on the application development and delivering, differentiating value to your business. And then we're going to have the opportunity to actually see some of this in action. It's one thing to talk about it, but let's actually see what the solutions that Mirantis and MKE can bring together to help you solve those problems. So with that, Toby, let's talk about why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to deploy applications in a cloud native environment? And I think some of the perspective I have on that, talking to customers and experiences we have in the market, is increasingly in a cloud native environment, application developers are in some aspects but have become to be expected to be system admins. In many ways, with the self-service and the capabilities of Kubernetes and all the cloud native infrastructure, some of the day-to-day operations from the day zero deployment and then the ongoing management of Kubernetes clusters have been pushed into the hands of the application developers to deal with as they need to spin up clusters to build and test their applications. And this has just put a lot of complexity onto their side. What's your perspective on that? Do you see similar things from your vantage point?
Oh, definitely. A lot of my experience, certainly in government, was handling clients and customers who weren't particularly didn't have deep technical expertise. They had serious domain knowledge, and as far as web content goes, they were peerless. But the further you get down the tech stack, the harder it got to find people who had the skill sets they were looking for. So we realized we were dealing with customers who didn't have the time to go and learn extensive applications or extensive infrastructure applications. They didn't have sometimes the technical capability. They didn't have the space in professionally to be able to do that. They were fantastic at building Drupal websites, building sort of test frameworks for their sites. But in terms of picking up new skills, there's a lot of people out there who that's not in their job description. That's not something that they could spend time doing. It's not something they could justify to their executive. So we really keen to sort of look at that solution around how do we help people focus on their day jobs? How do we help them deliver better product for the people that need it? And how do we help them ensure that the quality that they've come to expect?
Right. So I think you hit on another key point there. You know, that in a cloud native world and taking advantage of Kubernetes to help orchestrate container-based applications, there's an incredible bit of power and benefit of using something like Kubernetes, but it's also very complex. It's another thing that the application developer has to learn, right? I mean, it seems like every day they're being thrown another new programming language or development environment or set of tools, or just there's constantly more and more things to have to learn, and it just at times could become overwhelming for them and just get in the way of doing what they need to do best, which is really focusing on those applications and how they can really deliver something differentiated for their business. The other thing I think we've heard that has been a challenge is the need to deploy these applications across a variety of cloud infrastructure environments. Multiple public clouds, sometimes needing to deploy both on a public cloud infrastructure as well as the public cloud, depending on the market. You mentioned government. Certainly, a lot of times still in the government environment where there's much of that still private infrastructure. With the need to, but some of that moving out towards certain parts of public cloud. And today, when you're needing to deploy across those disparate infrastructures, that oftentimes means having to write to different programming interfaces and the nuances of each of those environments, and that just brings a kind of a multiplicative complexity to that. How have you seen that then affect things on the application side coming down?
Yeah, it's and while a lot of the experience that we've got at Amazee.io and the Lagoon team is in sort of the public cloud side of things, we still see it all the time that the organization will sign a deal next week with Microsoft, or they'll sign a deal with AWS, and suddenly all their web properties are moving from AWS, they're moving to Azure, they're moving to Google, they're moving in-house with sometimes very little regard for particularly the web app side of things. These decisions might be made from a purely financial point of view, and suddenly you're lift and shifting from one cloud to another. One of the primary things that we see in the web app space is trying to make it so that app effectively will deploy anywhere, and that's kind of how we've got to try and smooth that transition. So you're not rewriting large parts of your code base to handle a different storage backend. You're not rewriting large parts to deal with different networking or different instances or applications or operating systems, etc. So really trying to make it so that application can be deployed anywhere and anywhere, but it's trying to make it as simple as possible. And that's where certainly Kubernetes is a great leveler. If you can get Kubernetes installed in an operating system in infrastructure, then your ability to layer on top of that is really top class.
Right. All right. Well, let's then talk about how can we help make it simpler for the developers? What is it that Mirantis and Lagoon, or maybe just the industry as a whole, what are the things that can be done to help? I guess I like to use the term. How can we let devs be devs? What are the things we can do to simplify that world? And the point you just raised, I think, maybe leads into what I see as kind of the first and perhaps number one requirement, which is abstract the complexity and the nuances and the uniquenesses of the infrastructure away from the developer. How can things be implemented such that the developer doesn't need to necessarily think about, or only think about as little as possible, the specifics of the infrastructure that they're running their application upon. And that also comes into the fact of creating an environment in which the application developer can consume the infrastructure as a service effectively, that they can just spin up clusters, deploy their applications, and really think about it as a service without actually thinking about how to actually have to build, manage, maintain, upgrade, making sure security patches are applied, and all of those types of things onto the infrastructure itself. Just if that part can be taken care of, and they can just fire it up and run their applications, then their lives become simpler. How about your perspective? What types of things from the application deployment side can simplify their lives?
Yeah, exactly. Let devs be devs. It's such a great way of explaining it. Again, and allowing them the time to be able to spend doing what they want to do. One of the biggest things I remember from, like, not the very distant past, but we wanted to deploy a new version, a test version of our application. We needed to go to Terraform, and we needed to roll out infrastructure, and we needed to roll out a new database cluster, and we needed to roll out new instances, and those instances are on the clock instantly as soon as they're running. So we've got to make sure our testing gets done, because you can see the bill ticking over. That's not great. That doesn't encourage people to test. They don't encourage people to spend a lot of time in these applications. So giving infrastructure that helps people, as you say, as a service, being able to spin up a test environment, share it with someone, being able to have a URL that you can pass to your manager, you can pass to your team, you can pass to your external contractors, whatever. I also like to talk about user space centric tooling, and that's the tools for the people in terms that the people understand. I'll use the example of kubectl, and I'll throw stuff my way if you don't pronounce it kubectl. I do. Really, that's great for people that administer Kubernetes, but for the 98% of users out there who don't administer a Kubernetes, kubectl makes no sense. They've got tools in their languages, whether it's npm or yarn or composer. These are the tools that they understand, and we've got to think of that when we're getting people to interact with our applications and infrastructure. Messaging, user experience, it's all around application first, not infrastructure first for us. So it's making sure that the on-ramp to learn how these things work is as smooth as possible. We're not forcing them to install boatloads of new software, download new manuals, learn entirely new patterns for calling and requesting things. So it's really trying to put user space centric tooling in, make it as easy as possible, abstract some of that complexity away.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I think those are good points. So let's kind of transition now a bit to talking about the offerings that Mirantis and Amazee provide to help address those solutions. A lot of times I like to think about Mirantis as the containers as a service platform. Mirantis provides a collection of software products that address both the infrastructure and the development side of a cloud native journey, if you will. We have a collection of offerings, and some of which we'll actually look at here today, specifically Container Cloud, and underneath that Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, that provide and sort of level up and present at a holistic view your broad cloud native deployment across one or more platforms itself. We have Container Cloud, as we'll talk more detail in a moment. Kubernetes Engine, which is fundamentally the Kubernetes orchestrator, but also offers support for Swarm as a choice for orchestration, and sort of manages all of your clusters and all your containers, and makes sort of the magic happen of providing a resilient and a reliable cloud native deployment of your container based applications. Then we have all the other supporting components that enable that. Container runtime, so the piece of software that actually runs within your container and talks to Kubernetes Engine and provides the container services. We have secure registry, which really fits very closely and very well onto the development side to help enable things such as essentially is a secure development pipeline and really integrates into your DevOps type workflows to provide secure registry of your applications. And then, for those that might still be in a transition path, coming from a virtualization world, making their path over to the world of cloud native, we do offer a Mirantis OpenStack for Kubernetes, which allows you to bring your virtualization workloads on top of an OpenStack environment and get the benefit of Kubernetes to provide higher levels of resiliency, but also integrating with Container Cloud to give you one kind of a one pane of glass to manage both your virtualization OpenStack workloads, as well as now moving forward into your container-based workloads with Kubernetes. And then all of this, on top of that, we provide tools such as Lens, which provide an enhanced level of visibility to really zoom into what's going on in your infrastructure. So, regardless of where you might sit, if you're an application developer or actually responsible for the operations of the infrastructure itself, Mirantis has tools and offerings to help deploy and provide that. And coming back to the concept of thinking about the challenges that the application developers have, I think one of the things we really think a lot about here at Mirantis is, how do we make the world easier for the application developers to deliver those innovative applications and services? But we also think then about, how can that dovetail into the day-to-day operations, and how does the operations team enable that better experience for those devs and provide that. And we can, we provide that both as a collection of tools that help enable either the application developer or the operations team to deploy that, but we can also deliver that to you as a service in a fully managed offering to allow your teams to put more focus on your application side and spend less time actually managing your infrastructure itself.
And so this is one of the. I was going to say this is one of the interesting disconnects in the DevOps journey, is that DevOps was initially about bringing operations and developers closer together, and we're now getting to the stage where the tool chains and the tool sets are so well evolved that they can sort of almost separate again. Operations don't really need to know too much specialty information about developers in order to provide them with the infrastructure they need, and the developers don't need to know too much about the infrastructure to build the applications they build. So it's this curious convergence divergence thing. But I think that's really healthy, because it shows that the industry and the sector is maturing.
Right now, I think it's also then a factor of making it creates the opportunities for them to each focus on the areas where they do best, or at times, as again, we're IT organizations can sort of shift their precious resources into more focus on really what creates differentiated value for their company. And in many cases, let's be honest, the infrastructure is just a necessary service. It's like the internet service coming into the building, or the water and electricity coming in, right? It's a utility in many respects, and what their team is really does to create value is to build those applications. So the more we can help sort of offload that and make that simpler for the organization as a whole, the more efficient and more competitive that they can be. So we'll kind of drill down a bit now into Container Cloud and just talk a little more about that. And we're actually going to see Container Cloud here in a moment. But Mirantis Container Cloud is fundamentally the fastest, easiest, and most complete way to manage multi-cloud container orchestration. And a key tenet within Mirantis is the fact, or the concept of providing choice to our users and our customers. And with this respect, choice means choice of infrastructure, running your Kubernetes infrastructure on top of either private or public cloud deployments. And public cloud may mean AWS, it may mean Microsoft Azure. It could also be bare metal as a service offering, such as that from Equinix, or running it on-prem on your own private infrastructure. We also provide you a choice in terms of things such as your orchestrator. Certainly, we've been talking a lot today about Kubernetes, and Kubernetes being, perhaps the most popular container orchestration offering out there. But we also provide Swarm as a choice for your orchestrator, and we have a lot of customers that still are very heavily dependent on Swarm to run and manage their container deployment. So really, we want to enable you with a choice so that the tools and the software and the platform doesn't limit you in how you wish to move forward. But coming back to that, choice can create complexity, and we want to simplify that by providing you with that one consistent experience from day zero through the rest of your journey, from the onboarding and deployment of your workloads to the actual development of your workloads, providing a common API and common programming model, so that regardless of whether you're deploying on private or hosted bare metal or Amazon or Azure or others, that you really have a consistent programming model and interface to your Kubernetes clusters across those different infrastructures. And so with that, on top of Mirantis Container Cloud is really then facilitating sort of your visibility into your container, your orchestration infrastructure, which is then Mirantis Container Engine or Kubernetes Engine. And Mirantis Kubernetes Engine provides a lot of functionality and a lot of pieces that come together to really make your container workloads happen. Within that, again, we just talked about the choice of both Kubernetes or Swarm, or Swarm, I should say. At times there are applications where there's a need to actually use both of those in a deployment. And we again, coming back to the concept of choice, we provide the tools included, but allow them to be changed out for components such as the networking aspect or the ingress components. We provide with Mirantis Kubernetes Engine Calico and Nginx for the networking and the ingress functionality. But should you wish to use a different technology, a different offering there, you can do so. We use the term batteries included, but swappable. So you have that choice, you have that flexibility to adapt the platform to your particular requirements and needs. Fundamentally then creating a scenario where your container workloads are well taken care of and able to be deployed and managed on a ongoing lifecycle management perspective, without having any concern of how that would happen with the different pieces you might need as your requirements evolve and grow. All right, let's Toby, let's switch over and let's talk about the Lagoon side of the world.
So yeah, Lagoon it's an application delivery platform for Kubernetes. It sits on top of the Kubernetes layer, so it sort of abstracts away some of the Kubernetes and puts it specifically tailored for applications, for web applications. So a lot of the configuration, a lot of the tooling, all the insights that you'd use in running your application, that's what Lagoon provides, and that's how Lagoon integrates with the Kubernetes underneath it. The whole idea behind Lagoon is to help, as we said earlier in the thing, to help developers be developers. We built the tool to look at the Kubernetes elements and work out, what does a developer need? Does a developer want to specify their mount point? They might do. They know in their file system where those files have to go. Do they care about storage classes? Do they care about life cycles? Do they care about reclaim policies? They don't know about any of this stuff. All they know is they want a file system at this location. They want a backup to happen at this time. They want a particular job to happen at a particular time. They know this stuff, and they've got to get it into Kubernetes as easy as possible. And I've done Kubernetes for long enough to know that it's never easy. It's never straightforward. So what we do with Lagoon is try and give the people the ability to specify these things, and then we take it away and we turn that into Kubernetes native objects behind the scenes, as well as integrating with a wide range of different tools behind the scenes. There's two main ways that someone can install Lagoon. There's two deployment models. It's got the concept of a core and a remote. The Lagoon core handles the API, handles the authentication, a lot of the centralization. That's the bit that people will, behind the scenes, deal with. But then core drives remotes, and in most cases, you'll find that people run multiple remotes off a single core, and that could be because you've got different customers who have different requirements. You can run a AWS, an on-prem, and a Google Cloud remote all off a single core. Some people run production and development workloads in different clusters. Some people split workloads across clusters. It's a very flexible model. Remote is where the actual web application action happens. That's where the sites get deployed. That's where your database clusters live. That's where your ingresses point to. That's where your logs are collected. It's where backups happen. So that's the actual sort of heavier part of Lagoon. And that's the bit that gets deployed into your cluster, whether it's public cloud, whether it's a Amazee.io managed cloud, whether it's your own managed one. The idea is that you commit your code to your Git repository. Lagoon's watching your Git repo. As soon as it sees that commit, it knows what to do. So core will pick up that commit. It'll say, okay, I know that you've just pushed a little bit of code to your development branch for this WordPress site. I'm going to go off. I'm going to update your site for you. I'll pull down that latest piece of code. I'll read what's in the config file. We need 1 or 2 config files to drive Lagoon. From that, those services will be provisioned. If there's an existing site there, it'll be updated, it'll be refreshed. The relevant things will be created, backup schedules, cron schedules, they'll all be made. Your storage will be provisioned for you. Your database, so we've got some neat tools that integrate with managed database clusters. So gone are the days of having to spin up a brand new database every time you want a development environment. We can basically create a new database inside a managed database cluster. So it makes these things dead simple to scale out. Lagoon will then add all the necessary config into those. So if you've got scaling, if you need to be high availability, all that's handled by Lagoon. When remote's done, it fires back to core and says, hey, why don't we send our developer a little notification, say that your site's ready, check it out. And if there's been an issue or something, we'll have logs in there as well. And there's a UI where people can see what's happening. But I'm going to say it's really simple. That's because I've been doing this nonstop for 4 years now.
Well, great. We'll get a chance to see it here in just a moment. So I guess with that, let's see it in action. We'll shift to the dangerous part of the presentation today of the live demo, but we'll kick over that, and let's see if we can share screen real quickly. I'm going to start off with a view of how we actually would spin up a Kubernetes cluster and create the machines we need to then deploy our applications into. When we first come into Mirantis Container Cloud, we would obviously authenticate with the application, and you can do that with direct credentials or take advantage of things like signing in with Google, which I'll do here. And of course, we've timed out, so here we go. It is refreshed with my credentials. So in this case, I've logged in, and I already have a user profile that has been set up and a project that I've been assigned to, and certain credentials behind that. But if I were a developer, essentially, this is the environment that would be ready to roll into. Bring up Mirantis Container Cloud and say, all right, let's go spin up a cluster here. So at this point, we're going to create my test cluster, and I have the ability. We talked about Mirantis Container Cloud supporting a variety of infrastructure. We have obviously OpenStack for the classic virtualization workloads, but we have other options today: AWS, Equinix, Azure, vSphere, and very shortly we'll also have support for Google as well. But for today, let's spin this up on AWS. Then my provider credentials are here. If I had a reason to deploy in a particular version of MCC and MKE, I can choose that from there, but we'll just leave it to the latest. Latest is always greatest. I can configure things if necessary within Kubernetes for the CIDR blocks. And then we also have the ability to do stack-like logging and so forth within our Kubernetes to give us that enhanced level of visibility and debug capabilities into our cluster. So I'm going to enable logging here. if I wanted to, I could configure alerts to be sent to email recipients, have those alerts sent via Slack, and likely also into Salesforce. But for today's purpose, we'll skip that. So now I've configured or created my cluster, but as you see, the provider is AWS, and Container Cloud is telling me, hey, you create a cluster, but you actually need to put some machines into this cluster. I need something to go run on. So I'm going to pop into my cluster, and now I will actually start assigning some machines to the cluster itself. In this case, I'm going to create 3 manager nodes. And it's reminding me what's the minimum requirements are, so I need 3 managers and 2 workers for this cluster deployment. I have the ability to select the AWS instance type. I'll just leave that as default. Pick the AMI ID, leave the rest of this as default for the time being. And that's going to kick off and on the backend magic between MCC and AWS, actually start deploying and provisioning those machines. So that's got my manager nodes kicked off and going. So now let me go create my worker nodes, telling me I still need 2. Of course, that could be as many as you may wish to actually have for your particular deployment. And in this case, I'm going to make sure Stacklight is enabled on these worker nodes as well. And with that, those are in process. Now, this process takes, depending on the infrastructure in the environment, 20, maybe 30 minutes, depending, to actually deploy, provision, and bring spin up those machines. So we're not going to sit here for that time and wait for these to come up before we get into actually deploying it and using Lagoon here. So at this point, we're going to switch over and let Toby pick up the share and go from there. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Toby, you pick up.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So what I'll do a quick run through a demo of Lagoon, of the UI, of how it works. So we've got a project in Lagoon. We've got a couple of projects here. The Mirantis WP demo. I've decided to do a quick demo in WordPress just to show sort of the power of Lagoon for this content management system type application. So a bit of information on the screen here. It tells us about the Git repo. The Git repo is a fairly standard Git repository. It's got a pretty ordinary WordPress install, a couple of special bits. There's a Lagoon YAML file that outlines a little bit of the config that Lagoon needs. And this is really the only specialist file that Lagoon requires. It's got some tasks that run before and after rollouts. These ones take a database backup before doing anything. That's really important for some people who need to make sure that if they've made a mistake, if there's something wrong with the rollout, they've got a last known good to revert back to. There's a couple of settings around maintenance mode. There's a task that will install WordPress if nothing's there. So the first time you ever run this environment, it'll deploy a WordPress in there for you. We can set some cron jobs, we can define some routes, etc. Lagoon itself reads the configuration from a Docker Compose file. So again, a standard Docker Compose file, defines the services, defines the images to build, sets some sort of Lagoon specific labels that are passed through to the Kubernetes. But this Docker Compose file will build in your local machine. You can stand it up. You can use your local development tool of choice to be able to stand up those Docker images so you can do your local development. In Lagoon itself, here we've got 2 branches. We've got a main and a development branch. What you can see inside the branch is a little bit of metadata about it. You can see the route that's been given. This has a production route. So we can see here that I've built a beautiful site that tells us it's a production site. So you can see welcome to production, nothing to flash in there. We can see that there's a couple of deployments that have occurred. Quite a few deployments have occurred. These are ones that I've done throughout the day, trying to get this demo absolutely perfect, obviously. Inside here, breakdown of what a deployment actually means. So there's a bit of setting up the environment. There's a bit of setting all the variables. This is all the Kubernetes stuff happening behind the scenes, we've tried to abstract a lot of this away so that the user's not faced with barrages of onslaughts of YAML and command lines stuff spewing out. But we tell here a little bit of information that helps people understand what those services are doing, those services being built from the Docker Compose file. The image build, so this is a standard Docker image build running these pro rollout tasks. So that's the database backup we saw. And again, through here, configuring those ingresses, configuring the backups, the backup schedules, backup retentions, pushing the images into the registry. That's the important part. The registry is a container image registry that resides usually in the Lagoon remote component. And that allows the images to push pretty quickly. But as the Kubernetes scales, as we see those pod replicas roll out, that's where the images will be coming from. So it's important to have that as close as possible. And you can then really see the benefit of the speed under Kubernetes. Again, post rollout tasks, we can see some of the stuff, the tidy up happen. That whole build took less than 3 minutes, start to finish. Inside here, we can see backups. So the backup schedules worked. We've got a couple of backups from last night. There's a Nginx one that I've already generated a restore for, but I could click retrieve on that MariaDB, and that will trigger a restore for that database backup. If I open Lens quickly, we should be able to see that there's a restore job, I think, has just vanished off the top of that screen. If I refresh this, we can see it's now downloadable. So I can click on download here, and that will download that database. If I open it in a text editor like an idiot, that was actually surprisingly quick. So we can see that's a database backup. I can import that straight into my local version of my WordPress site. So I can get that in nice and quick. I can make sure I've got that database from last night. Tasks, there's the ability to define tasks. So as we saw with these pre and post rollout tasks inside the Lagoon YAML, we can also operate some tasks here. And that's really important for the less technical users. So for people who don't have CLI access, for people who don't have access to Kubernetes, there's a number of tasks that people find really important, really useful to run. So whether it's something as simple as generating a login, a one-time login for a Drupal site, whether it's running some cache flush, if your site gets slow at 3 p.m. on a Friday, a cache flush may fix that. If you can put that in the hands of someone who can run that, that's really awesome. But those tasks can get really as interesting as you like. Anything that someone does as a sort of repetitive action can be turned into a task that can then be run in the UI by someone who doesn't need their development machine. They don't need command line access. They just need the relevant permissions inside Lagoon to be able to run that task. So what I'll do is I'll hop across to the dev environment, and we can see again, I've done a few deployments out here. The dev environment doesn't have a fancy URL, so it just lives on a standard provisioned URL. This is one that the ingress is automatically generated inside Lagoon. This doesn't have anything installed, so this has just got a WordPress welcome screen. But what I have here is the ability to run a task. So I can run a task that will copy the database across from production. So if I copy that database across, I'll get whatever's the latest in my production site. Now, my production site from memory was relatively boring. It said welcome to production, I think, on the front page, but it gives you an idea of the power of this. So if I run that task, I can flick across to Lens quickly, and what I should see is a Lagoon task starts up here. So this task is the part that's actually running that. So you can see it's going through, it's running the command, it's pulling the data down from the main site. And if I hop back in here, I should see that the task is complete once I get logged back in again. So that task is complete. if I head to my site now, take off that bit, fingers crossed, it'll tell me now I'm on my dev site, welcome to production. So that's taken me less than a minute to synchronize my database between production and development. If I wanted to, I could spin up more environments. I could build a test environment. I could build a PR environment. I can do all manner of things here and operate between these. And just to demonstrate the power of Lagoon, so we've got this WordPress demo, but the UI that we're actually running Lagoon in here, I've got running inside the Lagoon. So this project is a React, the UI is built in React, but that deployed into the Lagoon and is then providing the UI for the Lagoon. So it's a really nice show of exactly what can be done here. I can do work on the UI exactly the same as I do work on my WordPress site. I can update my CSS, I can do styling, I can add new features, I can do all manner of things inside the UI and have the UI still connected to Lagoon and be able to really prove the work that I'm doing in a production or production-like environment. So it's, as you can see, it's massively powerful. That's a really whistle-stop tour, but hopefully you get a bit of an idea of what can be done with Lagoon. So with that, I'll stop sharing and I will hand back.
Thanks, Toby. That was, quite, real interesting to see the power of things that can be done with Lagoon to help deploy applications in a lot quicker and simpler way. And I think that the ability to kind of spin up a development environment, but pull in from your existing deployment workload, I can see how that can be really helpful to quickly pick up and prototype out or test out some changes before you actually push those out to deployment. So, all right, well, let's before we wrap up here, why don't we transition? Or got a few Q&As in the chat that we can take here to as we kind of conclude for today. But first one here is, what public cloud infrastructure is your Kubernetes supported on? So this is referring to the Mirantis Kubernetes Engine offering as well as in the Mirantis Container Cloud. We support running on your own private infrastructure, bare metal. Also support hosted bare metal from Equinix and Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, VMware, and shortly we'll be adding support for Google Cloud as well. All right, so the next question, do developers need to re-architect to run their application on MCC with Lagoon? Toby, I think that's for you.
Yeah, I think no. I'm going to say no and be bold here. The whole idea is that the application should stay as close to the original application, and that's why from the Lagoon point of view, we picked Docker Compose. We know that Docker Compose is a fairly ubiquitous standard these days, and there's a lot of fairly standard templates out there, so people should be able to, if we haven't got an example or a demonstration or a template for that particular application yet, I'm more than happy to look at it and consider it if someone wants to have a crack at making one. But looking at what's been done, looking at that prior work should give people enough of a pointer. It shouldn't need to be massively re-architected. There might be a little bit of cleverness in how you will call it Lagoonize it, but we've got a lot of experience doing a lot of apps, and we've done a lot of apps retrospectively. So there's a fairly large body of work out there that should help, but no major re-architecting needed.
Great. Well, I think that certainly is the goal, is to allow these tools to come together to create that seamless environment for the application developers. All right, and then we've got time for, I think, one more question. Do I have to write my application specifically to the APIs of each unique public cloud? And I think this is in reference to the MCC, MKE kind of environment where we can support Kubernetes on top of the multiple cloud providers. And the short answer there is no. That is sort of the whole value, or one of the large values that MCC provides and the MKE provides, is abstracting the uniquenesses of each of those cloud providers from you as the infrastructure provider and or the application developer, allowing you to write to a common API from the Mirantis MKE perspective, and then deploy your applications through that, knowing that they can then be readily deployed out onto those different infrastructures. So really a powerful thing, and gives you a lot of flexibility, gives your organization a lot of flexibility and control, both from a expense management perspective, as well as just an availability and deployment capabilities aspect.
I think it's the same. It's the same for Lagoon as well. Not having to write your application for specific storage backends, it makes a huge difference. Not having to deal with that variability, not having to account for things that are missing in one provider's implementation and not present in someone else's. Having a common level that you can just comfortably build and develop against really reduces that friction, really reduces the effort, and really increases the ability to deliver quality work more quickly.
Right. Great. All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. We want to thank you for joining us here. I want to thank Toby for joining as well, and sharing a lot of great information and cool stuff about Lagoon and what's coming down the pipe here from Amazy as they join the Mirantis family. If you'd like to learn more, we certainly welcome you to visit us on the web at mirantis.com or amazy.io. And certainly happy to reach out and chat with you more about how we can help you in your cloud native journey and help fundamentally help devs be devs. Toby, any last words?
No, if there's anything people want to see us cover or want to see us demo, maybe at some point we'll build up to a live Lagoon install demo, but I'm not feeling quite bold enough for that yet. But certainly interested to look and seeing what we can cover going forwards.
Great. Well, again, thanks for joining us here today, and thanks to everyone. Thanks to our audience for being with us, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a good day.